Beneath the glittering chandeliers, 1,000 shards of light scattered across polished marble floors, glasses of champagne catching fire in the reflection. The air shimmered with soft music, strings weaving melodies that carried whispers of romance through the grand ballroom. Women in dresses that flowed like rivers of silk drifted past. Men in tailored suits laughed politely, and at the very edge of it all, one woman sat alone. Her name was Eleanor Parker, and though her navy gown clung with elegance and her smile was carefully painted, her solitude betrayed her. She raised a glass to her lips, not for thirst, but for armor, as eyes from surrounding tables lingered just a little too long. In the cruel light of celebration, loneliness can feel sharper than silence. She told herself it didn't matter, that she was only here for her best friend's wedding, that leaving early would appear ungracious. Yet beneath her calm surface, her pulse thudded with the ache of being seen as incomplete, as if love were a prize she had failed to claim. That night, the ballroom was heavy with judgment disguised as admiration. It was in that exact moment, when her loneliness pressed hardest against her ribs, that a shadow fell across her table. A tall figure slid into the empty chair beside her as if it had been waiting for him all along. Without asking, without hesitation, his presence rewrote the entire room. He leaned close, and his voice brushed her ear with a command that was both audacious and intimate. "Pretend you're with me." The words startled her, as if a spark had been struck in the silence of her heart. She turned, ready to dismiss this stranger, but the sight stopped her. Sharp lines of his suit, the glint of silver at his tie, eyes grey as steel, but alive with some unspoken fire. A stranger who carried power not just in his bearing, but in the quiet certainty that he would be obeyed. Eleanor's breath faltered. The room seemed to pause, all murmurs receding into the faint hum of the violin. She should have refused, she should have laughed. But something in his gaze, something in the way those words threaded through her loneliness, made her hesitate. For a single heartbeat, her isolation dissolved, replaced by the dangerous warmth of being chosen, even if it was only pretend. Around them, whispers rose. Guests glanced with fresh curiosity. The lonely girl no longer looked so alone. Heat spread across her cheeks as she realized the shift. Judgment had turned into speculation, and speculation into envy. His hand rested lightly on the back of her chair, a gesture so practiced, so convincing, that she almost believed it herself. She bit her lip and whispered, "And how far are you planning to take this little act?" He tilted his head, the faintest curve brushing his lips. "Leave that to me." The evening unfolded like a script written in haste, yet performed with effortless grace. Strangers congratulated them, couples smiled knowingly, and whenever her nerves threatened to betray her, he was there, covering a stumble with a quiet remark, deflecting a question with a steady hand at her waist. Eleanor felt the walls she had built begin to soften, her heart swaying against its own will. She reminded herself, this is pretend, just a dance within a story not hers to keep. Yet the air between them carried an electricity she could neither ignore nor explain. As the music swelled, as crystal clinked in celebration of someone else's love, Eleanor discovered that the loneliest place in the world could also become the beginning of something unexpected. Her solitude had drawn him, his command had tethered her, and together they created an illusion too vivid to remain harmless. She knew, even as laughter and light swirled around them, that this night would not end as easily as she had imagined. Some stories do not wait for permission to begin. They carve their way into existence with a single whispered word. For Eleanor, it was pretend. A dangerous game, yet one that made her heart beat with a rhythm she thought she had long forgotten. And so the performance began, though neither could predict how quickly the lines between truth and fiction would blur. If this story stirs something gentle in your soul, if you've ever felt the ache of loneliness or the quiet healing touch of unexpected connection, I invite you to share your thoughts below. Leave a comment. Let your heart speak. If you wish to walk further with me into this unfolding tale, remember to subscribe, so every new chapter finds its way to you. And if these words soothe you, even just a little, your like is more than a gesture. It is a small spark of warmth that helps me keep writing, keep weaving, keep healing through stories. The chandeliers burned brighter, the music lifted, and somewhere in the space between pretense and reality, Eleanor's story moved forward. The stranger's name was about to be revealed, and with it, the first fracture in her carefully guarded world. The ballroom faded into a blur of gilded laughter and perfumed whispers, but Eleanor could not steady her racing heart. She sat across from the man who had rewritten her night with a single sentence, his presence commanding without effort, his silence weighted with secrets. He introduced himself with a name that seemed to echo through the air. Peter Blackwood. She knew it. Everyone in finance knew it. The youngest CEO to carve his empire out of stone and steel, a man both feared and admired, often described in words colder than the steel of his skyscrapers. And now he was beside her, lifting her glass with his long fingers as though they had always been acquainted. Her mind told her to keep distance, to remember the stories she had read about him. Ruthless, calculating, untouchable. Yet the faint curve at the corner of his lips was not the mask of a machine, but something disarming, almost human. The scent of sandalwood lingered between them, grounding her in the moment. She forced herself to play along, to smile when others approached, to nod when Peter introduced her as though she belonged in his world. And strangely, she found she could. Every gesture became a dance between them. The way his arm rested with ease across the back of her chair, the way his eyes caught hers before she faltered in front of curious strangers, the way he spoke her full name, Eleanor Parker, as if it was a melody. The more they performed, the less it felt like acting. The whispers that had once pierced her with loneliness now wrapped her in warmth. People looked at her differently, as though she were radiant simply by existing near him. She told herself it was illusion, yet a part of her began to breathe easier, as though she had been waiting for this moment without knowing. When dessert was served, he leaned closer, his voice low enough to blend with the music. "You're quite the actress," he murmured. She caught his gaze, steady and sharp, yet softened by something fleeting. Her lips curved with reluctant amusement. "And you're dangerously convincing." His reply was simple, but it carved its way through her defenses. "Who said I was pretending?" The words landed like an arrow, igniting her chest with a warmth she could not ignore. She turned away, afraid that if she met his eyes for too long, her heart would betray her. Later, when the celebration spilled onto balconies glowing under moonlight, Elena found herself walking beside him, the cool night air easing the heat in her veins. City lights stretched endlessly beyond, shimmering like fallen stars scattered at their feet. She thought about leaving, retreating into the safety of solitude, but then his hand brushed against hers, deliberate and steady. He didn't grasp, didn't demand. It was a simple touch, grounding her as the world around them spun in ribbons of light. And she let her fingers rest there, trembling yet still. 3 nights later, as she exited her office with tired eyes and ink-stained fingers, the sleek black lines of a Bentley slid to the curb before her. The window lowered, and Peter's familiar profile emerged against the dim glow of street lamps. Her breath caught, memory rushing back like a tide. He did not waste words. 5 minutes, he said, voice even, but his eyes carried something heavier. Against her better judgment, she entered, and the car door closed her into his world once more. Inside, leather and silence cocooned them. He spoke of pressure, of rumors that stalked him like shadows. His lack of family, of a partner, turned into fuel for endless speculation. She listened, torn between disbelief and recognition. He asked her to continue the pretense, to walk at his side, not just for one night, but through the labyrinth of scrutiny and flashing cameras. Her instincts as a journalist screamed caution, but her heart whispered of opportunity. She thought of her investigations, of doors closed tight to her. With him, those doors might open. Yet the decision was not made of logic alone. It was in the way his voice softened when he told her she had been strong, graceful, unshaken by the weight of the stage. It was in the rare curve of his lips when she teased him, and the quiet laugh that escaped before he could hide it. That laugh, fragile as thawing ice, wrapped around her heart like healing light. She should have refused, she knew. But instead, she leaned back, pretending to deliberate, when in truth the choice had already been made. She extended her hand, slender and unsteady. "Temporary," she said. His palm closed over hers, warm and firm, sealing not just a deal, but a fragile bond neither could name. "Deal," he replied, his tone cool, but his gaze unwavering. In that clasp, something unspoken settled, something far more binding than any contract. Days blurred into nights of opulent halls and glittering chandeliers. She walked at his side, heels betraying her nerves, yet his hand steadying her every falter. To the world, they were a couple, bathed in luxury. To her heart, it became something dangerous, tender and impossible to contain. Between the staged smiles and whispered endearments, there were moments when she glimpsed the man beneath the empire, the boy who had once loved the sea blue his mother adored, the man who carried solitude like armor. Each fragment of him unraveled her, thread by thread, until she no longer knew where the performance ended and her own longing began. And though she reminded herself each night that it was only pretend, each morning she awoke with the echo of his voice in her ears, as if her heart had learned a new rhythm. It was a rhythm that healed her loneliness, even as it tangled her in threads she feared she could never escape. Thus the pretense grew into something neither dared to name. And as another evening approached, another gala with lights too bright and whispers too sharp, Eleanor felt the shift in her chest, the slow, inevitable realization that what had begun as illusion was quietly, inexorably becoming her truth. The next evening rose upon her like a curtain lifting, the city draped in twilight's velvet hush, and Eleanor found herself seated in Peter's car once again, the hum of the engine carrying her into a life she still told herself was borrowed. The gala that night was a world of gold, a place where chandeliers bloomed like flowers of fire, and the air was perfumed with roses and money. Eleanor had dressed carefully, the gown a shade of deep emerald that caught the light with every step, her heart drumming against her ribs as though reminding her of the lie she was living. Yet when Peter stepped beside her, his hand steady at her back, her fear melted into something else, something warmer, something dangerously healing. Inside, their entrance was a performance written by unseen hands. Heads turned, murmurs rippled like waves, and eyes clung to them with curiosity sharpened by envy. Peter was immovable, a figure of command and composure, but Eleanor felt the quiver of nerves rising in her throat. She wanted to stumble, to shrink away from those gazes that dissected her existence. But then his voice brushed against her ear, low and intimate. "Just smile, Parker." It was simple, almost careless, but in it was the promise of a shield. She smiled, and though her lips trembled at first, the warmth of his gaze steadied her. Each step they took together carved new lines across her soul. When she faltered, he guided. When she grew lost in the sea of strangers, he anchored. At one point, the click of a spoon slipping from her fingers rang too loudly in the room, her cheeks flushing with humiliation. But Peter, without pause, tapped his own glass and lifted it high. "To tonight's success," he declared smoothly, and laughter rippled through the crowd as though the moment had been scripted. Eleanor looked at him, astonished and grateful, the sting of embarrassment dissolving under the quiet grace with which he covered her misstep. He met her eyes briefly, grey like storm clouds, and for an instant the facade of ice cracked, revealing something tender beneath. Later, the photographer guided them before a wall of orchids, his commands intrusive, urging intimacy for the perfect shot. Eleanor stiffened, prepared to resist, but Peter's arm pulled her close, firm yet gentle, his voice a whisper at her temple. "Pretend we're newlyweds." Her heart buckled, heat surging through her chest as the cameras flashed, capturing a moment that felt far too real. She told herself it was only an act, yet her pulse betrayed her, pounding with the rhythm of truth. Between conversations with investors and glasses of champagne, she slipped away to the buffet, her instincts as a journalist forever awake. The whispers of businessmen, careless and hushed, carried words that sliced through her. Cayman Islands, funds diverted, numbers twisted. She memorized names, tucked them into her mind like sharp stones. When she returned, Peter's frown lingered, his eyes questioning. "Don't make me search for you," he murmured, tone calm but edged with something protective. She teased back with a grin. "A fake girlfriend vanishes sometimes." Yet inside, she trembled with the knowledge that her dual worlds, reporter and lover, truth and pretense, were on a collision course. The night deepened, and as they drifted through the gallery's corridors, Peter stopped before a painting washed in hues of ocean blue. His gaze lingered, his voice softer than she had ever heard. "My mother loved this color. She said it reminded her of home." Eleanor turned, caught off guard by the admission. For once, his mask slipped entirely, and what remained was not a CEO, but a man weighted with memory. She whispered gently, "It suits you." And in that moment, as silence embraced them, she realized he carried a loneliness that mirrored her own. The car ride home was quiet, the city rushing by in blurs of light and shadow. She clutched her purse tighter, replaying every word she had overheard, every glance she had shared with him. Her heart tugged her toward trust, toward the warmth he had shown when no one else was watching. but her duty whispered of danger, of a scandal that could unravel lives. She turned to him, almost confessing, but his profile was unreadable, carved in stone against the window's reflection. So she remained silent, guarding both her secret and her heart. The days that followed blurred into more nights of chandeliers and whispered performances, until one evening he appeared at her door in a suit less polished than usual, his presence somehow gentler. "Tonight is different," he said, and drove her to a concert hall where music rose like prayer. She sat beside him in the dim glow, their shoulders brushing, the notes of Beethoven swelling between them like tides. His face softened, stripped of steel, as he spoke of childhood nights when his mother played the same music, urging him to listen. Eleanor's chest ached, her heart folding into itself at the tenderness hidden in his words. She wanted to reach for his hand, to soothe the wounds of his past, but instead she whispered, "Imperfection is what makes us unforgettable." His lips curved faintly, and in that fleeting smile she saw the man no one else had known. Later, in a quiet cafe under golden lamps, he sipped coffee with an ease that startled her. No cameras, no boardroom battles, just a man across from her, laughing softly at her teasing. For a moment she forgot her mission, forgot the weight of signatures and ledgers waiting on her desk. All she felt was the healing warmth of his laughter, the gentle hum of life lived without walls. Yet when he stepped outside to take a call, she snapped photos of donor lists tucked on tables, names linked to the scandal she pursued. Her pulse quickened with guilt, with determination, with love she could not name. That night, back in her apartment, she sat before her laptop, torn in two. On one side, evidence began to assemble, threads of corruption weaving into a damning tapestry. On the other, her lips still tingled from the memory of his rare laugh. Her chest still glowed with the warmth of his stories. Justice and love stood as enemies, each demanding her allegiance. She buried her face in her hands, whispering, "Just pretend." But her heart no longer listened, and so the masquerade deepened, a dance on the edge of truth and illusion. Each step forward drew them closer, yet also nearer to collapse. For Eleanor knew that soon the veil of pretense would tear, and when it did, she would have to choose between the healing warmth of a love that had found her in loneliness and the cold justice of a truth too sharp to ignore. The days unfurled with a strange rhythm, every sunrise pulling Elena deeper into a story she had never planned to write with her own life. By day, her fingers scrolled through streams of financial reports, numbers and signatures glowing coldly on her screen. By night, she stood beside Peter beneath chandeliers and cameras, his hand steady at her waist, his voice a shield against curious eyes. The lines blurred until she no longer knew which part of her was the journalist, which part was the woman slowly unraveling in the quiet gravity of his presence. One evening, as she hunched over her laptop, a document froze her breath. BLC Holdings. Funds pushed through shadows, vanishing into voids of secrecy, and at the bottom his name etched in strokes too precise to mistake. Peter Blackwood. Her hands trembled as if the letters themselves carried weight enough to crush her. She leaned back, her chest tightening. Was it forged? Was it truth? The man who held her hand so tenderly in front of the world, was he also the architect of this labyrinth of deceit? Her heart and mind clashed like thunder. If she turned away, she would betray her calling, the very reason she had chosen a life of chasing truth through midnight deadlines. If she pressed forward, she risked destroying the man whose laugh had begun to heal fractures she thought would never mend. She whispered into the silence of her apartment, "Don't forget why you started, Parker." Yet another voice rose within her, gentler, pleading. "Don't forget how he makes you feel." The invitation to his best friend's birthday arrived soon after, dragging her into an atmosphere far removed from glittering galas. Neon lights flickered, music throbbed with jazz and laughter, and people danced without masks of pretense. Elena sat at the bar, her martini glass catching reflections of the spinning crowd, and thought about how strange it was to see him here. Loosened tie, jacket unbuttoned, shoulders less burdened. He approached with whiskey in hand, his gaze searching hers, and she felt the floor tilt beneath her. They spoke of ridiculous headlines, of his empire crumbling over imagined dance moves, and her laughter spilled so freely it startled her. For a fleeting hour, the storm of documents and suspicions lifted, leaving only two people suspended in the warmth of possibility. But then, outside under the quiet glow of street lamps, everything shifted. The night air smelled faintly of rain, and their footsteps echoed on the stone steps. She meant to break the silence, to keep her distance, but Peter turned, his eyes no longer grey ice, but molten silver. He stepped closer, and before she could retreat, his lips brushed hers in a kiss, both reckless and devastating. Whiskey, sandalwood, fire, all at once, pulling her heart into chaos. She froze, then yielded, her body betraying her resolve. When he pulled back, his voice was hushed, unsteady. "You make me forget this is pretend." Her chest ached with equal parts joy and terror. She wanted to tell him of the documents, of the storm gathering between their worlds, but instead she whispered, "We're just pretending." He nodded, but his eyes spoke otherwise, raw and unguarded. That night, as the car carried her home, she pressed her fingers to her lips, her thoughts in turmoil. Evidence demanded one story. Her heart begged for another. The newsroom sharpened the knife. Leaked scans, signatures, accusations, all pointing at him. Her editor's voice was stern, impatient, pressing her to publish before others could devour the scandal. Roberts, ruthless with words, was waiting to claim the story if she faltered. Eleanor knew that if he wrote it, Peter would be crucified before the world. She promised herself she would write it first, not to destroy, but to protect, to buy time, to search for the truth hidden beneath forged ink and whispered lies. Yet every keystroke cut into her heart. The morning he appeared at her door, his eyes stripped of warmth, his voice ragged with fury, she knew the veil had torn. "You got close to me just for your story, didn't you?" The accusation slashed her, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "I found evidence, Peter. I couldn't ignore it, but Her voice cracked. "I don't want to believe you're guilty." His laughter was sharp, bitter, breaking the fragile bridge between them. He turned away, declaring it over, and the sound of the door shutting was louder than any gunshot. She collapsed into silence, torn open by the weight of her choice. At the newsroom, whispers swirled, deadlines loomed, and the blank page on her laptop mocked her. She typed and deleted, tears blurring the words. She had lost both, the man who had made her feel seen in her most fragile hours, and the certainty of her profession. At night, she whispered into the city lights, "I never meant to hurt you." but destiny refused to stay silent. A message slipped into her inbox, anonymous, urgent, a file attached. The real culprit's name surfaced. Richard Hale. Contracts, transfers, signatures exposed the deception, proving Peter's innocence. Relief and anguish warred in her chest. She wanted to run to him, to lay the truth at his feet, to beg forgiveness. But when danger struck and shadows followed her through the streets, it was Peter's car that appeared, headlights slicing through the dark, his voice a shield as cold as steel, yet trembling with something deeper. He saved her, but his words remained distant, bruised with mistrust. Tears burned her eyes as she clutched the evidence, whispering promises to herself. "I'll prove it. Even if you never look at me again, I'll clear your name." For love, for truth, for healing, she had no choice but to fight. And as the night closed around her, Eleanor knew this was no longer a pretense, no longer a dance of illusion. It was war against lies, against time, against the walls that pride had built between two hearts. The path forward would not be gentle, yet somewhere within her the fragile flame of hope still glowed, a healing light refusing to die, and that light carried her into the next chapter, where love and justice would collide once more, forcing her to choose not only for herself, but for the man whose kiss still lingered like fire in her soul. The newsroom smelled of ink, stale coffee, and restless ambition. Elena sat at her desk. A storm of papers spread before her, but her heart no longer belonged to the cold numbers. Each document pulled her deeper into the truth, and each truth tangled her tighter in the memory of Peter's gaze, that wounded light she had caused. The anonymous email remained open on her screen, its attachment a dagger cloaked in salvation. Richard Hale. His name repeated itself through contracts and signatures, proof that the empire's rot had not begun in Peter's hands. Relief surged through her like a tide, but guilt followed close behind. She should have trusted him sooner, should have fought harder against her doubts. The thought of his anger, his silence, carved her more deeply than any deadline could. The city moved around her in careless rhythm, but Eleanor lived inside a fracture between worlds. By day, she stitched together evidence, tracing funds, sealing connections that would reveal Richard as the true architect of betrayal. By night, her body ached with absence. She turned in her bed, the sheets cold, her lips recalling the warmth of Peter's kiss, her ears echoing the bitter edge of his voice when he told her it was over. Healing should have been simple, a balm found in distance, but her heart refused to obey. It clung to him, to the way he steadied her hand when her glass trembled, to the half-smile that thawed her fear in crowded rooms. Danger sharpened with every step she took toward truth. She noticed the shadows following her from the office, the footsteps behind her as the night stretched long. When two men cornered her under the yellow glare of streetlights, fear turned her breath shallow. Their threats fell heavy, promises of silence forced by steel glinting in the dark. For a moment, Eleanor felt her world collapse. But then, like an answer whispered into the storm, headlights cut through the night. The familiar car screeched to a halt, and Peter emerged. Tall, relentless, his presence alone drove the men back into the shadows. His voice, low and commanding, carried the weight of a promise she had longed to hear. "Touch her, and you'll regret it." Her knees weakened, not just from fear, but from the realization that even wounded, even betrayed, he had not abandoned her. He stood before her like a shield. But when she whispered his name, he turned cold again, reminding her that trust once shattered was not easily rebuilt. His words pierced her, stripping away the fragile hope she had nurtured. She wanted to hold out the files, to cry that she had proof of his innocence. But his eyes were locked against her, fortified by disappointment. She let him walk away into the night, his figure shrinking until he vanished, and tears blurred the world around her. Still, she whispered to herself, "I will prove it. Even if he never believes me again, I will give him back the truth he deserves." In the solitude of her apartment, she poured her soul into the article. Her fingers trembled as they danced across the keyboard, weaving both evidence and heart into words strong enough to shift the tide. She exposed the forged signatures, the hidden trails of money, the deceit Richard had planted at the core of the empire. But behind each sentence lay her own vow, to heal not only Peter's reputation, but the wound she had carved in both their lives. When the article went live, the city erupted. Stock tickers steadied, headlines screamed of betrayal uncovered, and whispers began to turn from condemnation to vindication. Yet for Elena, there was no triumph, only a quiet prayer that he might read her words and see not only a journalist, but a woman who had risked everything for him. But fate was not gentle. Richard struck back with claws sharpened by desperation. The night they dragged her into an abandoned warehouse, Eleanor felt the thin line between life and death pressing at her throat. The scent of rust and oil filled the air, ropes cut into her wrists, and Richard's voice slithered with venom. He threatened her with silence eternal, demanded she erase what could no longer be hidden. Her heart pounded, but her voice, though trembling, refused to surrender. "I'd rather die than let you poison his name any longer." She closed her eyes, expecting the end, when suddenly the sound of an engine roared, the crash of doors burst, and Peter was there. Police swarmed the room, but it was his arms that reached her first, his body shielding her as if she were the only life worth saving. The knife caught her arm, blood warm against her skin, and she collapsed into him, her vision blurring. His voice trembled, broken in a way she had never heard. "Don't close your eyes. Please, Eleanor. I believe you. I believe you." For the first time, his walls shattered completely, and all she saw was a man terrified of losing her. She clung to his hand, whispering his name like a prayer, and let herself sink into the healing warmth of his presence as sirens wailed in the distance. The hospital became their sanctuary. White walls and the beeping of machines framed the longest hours of her life. Peter never left her side. His suit was stained with her blood, his hair disheveled, his grey eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. He whispered apologies into her hands, confessions into the silence, and when she finally opened her eyes, he broke like a boy who had carried too much weight alone. "I'm sorry for doubting you. I'm sorry for leaving you. Just stay. Please, stay." Tears streamed down her cheeks, but they were no longer born of despair. They carried the healing of knowing she was loved beyond pride, beyond empire, beyond fear. Slowly she regained her strength, and with each day his devotion unfolded in gestures small yet profound. He read reports at her bedside, peeled fruit with clumsy hands, and laughed softly when his sister teased him for his tenderness. Each moment stitched her heart back together, not with perfection, but with truth. And truth was warmer than any illusion. When at last she walked from the hospital into the sunlight, her hand in his. The world had shifted. Reporters gathered, flashes erupted, but Peter's voice rang steady as he declared his innocence and named her as the woman who had risked everything to reveal it. His hand drew her forward, into light, into love, and the words he whispered were no longer part of any performance. No more pretending. This time, it's forever. And so, as autumn's gold leaves drifted across the city, Eleanor realized that healing was not forgetting the wounds. They were part of her, part of him. Healing was walking forward with scars that shimmered in the light, reminders of the love that had survived fire and storm. What began with a whispered request at a wedding had become the story of her life, the truth she would carry into every sunrise that followed. And though trials remained, though shadows would always exist, she knew with certainty that the warmth between them would guide her, through fear, through sorrow, into the eternity they had chosen together. The garden at the Blackwood estate bloomed with roses pale as dawn, their fragrance spilling into the air like a benediction. Eleanor sat quietly by the pond, the reflection of lanterns quivering across the water. The world felt gentler now, though the scars of storm and blood were still tender beneath her skin. Healing was not a straight line. It moved in waves, soft one moment, aching the next. But Peter's presence steadied her in ways words could never capture. He was there in the quiet mornings, bringing tea he brewed too strong, there in the evenings, reading reports, but pausing to tuck the blanket around her shoulders, as though she were the most precious thing he had ever guarded. Days turned into weeks, and Elena slowly found herself at home in a world she once thought unreachable. She walked through the halls of the estate, her steps no longer hesitant, as if the house itself had accepted her. Emily welcomed her warmly, teasing her brother about how much softer he had become. A laughter filled spaces that had once echoed with only silence and formality. It was strange to her how quickly warmth could spread into corners once frozen by solitude. Healing moved through every conversation at dinner, every shared glance when music played in the background, every simple touch when their hands brushed across the table. One evening, Peter guided her to his study, a vast room of polished wood and shelves lined with books that smelled faintly of age. He showed her the map of his expansion plans again, the red pins scattered across continents. But this time his voice carried something gentler. "I built this for the world," he said, his hand brushing lightly across the map. "But what is the point if I cannot share it with someone?" She felt his words settle in her heart, soft but heavy, and she reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "You're not alone anymore." The words slipped out like a promise, and he squeezed her hand, his eyes unguarded in a way that left her breathless. Nights became their sanctuary. They would walk by the river near the estate, the moon a silver witness, their steps falling in rhythm with the water's murmur. Sometimes they spoke of their childhoods, her stories filled with ink-stained pages and the smell of cheap coffee, his marked by loneliness beneath a father's shadow. Other times they said nothing, content to let silence wrap them in its healing embrace. Each glance, each brush of his hand against her arm, carried a warmth that dissolved the distance still lingering between them. She began to wonder if love, real love, was less about grand gestures and more about these quiet moments of being fully seen. Yet even in the calm, her heart was not free of fear. Memories of the warehouse, of Richard's threats, still lingered. She would wake in the night, breath caught in her throat, haunted by shadows. Peter, sensing her unease, would pull her close, his arms a fortress against the dark. He whispered into her hair, "You're safe now." Those words, spoken over and over, became her anchor. Healing, she realized, was not the absence of pain, but the presence of someone willing to carry it with you. The press, insatiable as ever, turned their story into spectacle. Photographs of them together flooded magazines, their love painted as a fairy tale. But behind the flash of cameras, Eleanor knew it was not spectacle. It was real, raw, imperfect, and more beautiful because of it. One afternoon, while reporters gathered outside the gates, Peter leaned down and whispered with a playful grin, "Shall we give them something to write about?" He kissed her, not for the world, but for her, and the world faded in that instant. Still, duty pulled at her. Her editor pressed for another article, not about scandal this time, but about truth and resilience. She hesitated, afraid of exposing their intimacy to pages meant for public eyes. But Peter encouraged her. "Write it," he said, his voice steady. "Let them see you for who you are, not just for who they think you are with me." And so she wrote. Not a story of CEOs and signatures, but of healing after betrayal, of courage in the face of fear, of love discovered in the unlikeliest of places. When the piece was published, it resonated with thousands. Messages poured in, strangers confessing their own stories of heartbreak and renewal, and Eleanor felt the weight of her words turning into light for others. As winter crept into the city, the Blackwood estate transformed. Fire crackled in the hearth, pine trees shimmered with gentle lights, and the scent of cinnamon drifted through the halls. On Christmas Eve, Peter led Eleanor into the garden, now dusted with frost. He stopped by the old oak tree, its branches strung with tiny golden lights, and handed her a small velvet box. Inside, a pen rested, her name engraved in delicate script. "For the stories yet to be written," he said softly. She felt tears sting her eyes, not for the gift itself, but for the thought it carried, that he saw her, truly saw her, as more than the role she played in his life. She kissed him there, beneath the golden lights, and whispered, "This is the only story I want to keep writing." His arms closed around her, and for once there were no shadows of doubt between them, only the healing warmth of two hearts that had fought their way through storms and found each other whole. But love, Eleanor knew, was not the end of the journey. It was the beginning. And as the new year approached, she sensed the world still had trials waiting for them, secrets still untold, tests that would challenge the promises they had made. Yet, with Peter's hand entwined with hers, she felt ready. Whatever storms might rise again, they would face them together, not as strangers bound by pretense, but as lovers who had chosen truth over illusion. The night sky blazed with fireworks, reflections dancing in Peter's eyes as he whispered against her ear, "Forever starts here." And Eleanor, her heart swelling with warmth, believed him. She believed in the healing they had built together, in the love that had risen from ruin, and in the promise of every sunrise yet to come. Snow melted into soft rain as winter yielded to early spring, the city shifting its rhythm, and with it, Eleanor's life took on a new cadence. She no longer walked with hesitation through the halls of the Blackwood estate. She belonged there now, though she never ceased to marvel at how strange and tender it felt to find her place in a world that had once seemed carved from ice. Peter, once known for his unshakable composure, now revealed himself to her in fragments of warmth, quiet glances across breakfast, half smiles when she teased him, gentle touches when no one else was watching. These pieces of him, offered freely, became her healing balm. One afternoon she wandered into his library and found him asleep on the couch, a book resting on his chest, his tie loosened, his face softened in a way the public would never recognize. She stood there for a long moment, her heart stirring at the sight of the man behind the empire, the one who allowed himself to rest only when he knew she was near. She set the book aside and draped a blanket over him, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. His eyes fluttered open, catching hers, and he reached for her hand with a half-awake murmur. "Stay." She sank down beside him, their fingers entwined, silence weaving around them like a sacred thread. In moments like that, she learned that love did not always roar. Sometimes it whispered. Days unfolded with the gentle rhythm of shared routines. They cooked simple meals together, laughing at his clumsy attempts with a knife, his pride dissolving when she kissed away his frustration. They took evening walks through the garden, the air scented with roses and rain, her steps sometimes faltering in familiar heels only for him to steady her with the same quiet devotion. She teased him that one day she would learn to walk without stumbling. He answered with a smile that said he preferred her exactly as she was. Each exchange left her heart softer, reminding her that healing did not demand perfection, it blossomed in acceptance. Yet, beneath the serenity, Eleanor felt the faint stirrings of unease. The world beyond their gates had not forgotten the scandal. Whispers lingered in boardrooms and headlines, shadows that clung to Peter's name even as his innocence was declared. At night she sometimes caught him by the window, staring out at the city, the weight of expectation pressing against his shoulders. She would slip behind him, her arms circling his waist, her cheek resting against his back. "You don't have to carry it alone," she whispered, and each time his hands closed over hers, grounding himself in her presence. It was then she realized that love was not only her healing, but his as well. Spring deepened, and with it came invitations neither of them could avoid. Another gala, this time not as a performance, but as a declaration. Eleanor's heart raced as she stepped beside him, no longer pretending, her hand firmly in his. The flash of cameras was relentless, questions shouted in waves, but Peter's voice cut through it, steady and sure. "She is not a story," he told them. "She is my truth." The words burned into her, carving away the last remnants of doubt. No longer a disguise, no longer a mask. This was love unveiled. But even amidst the applause, trials returned. Investors, hungry for reassurance, questioned her presence. Colleagues whispered about her credibility as a journalist now tied so closely to him. The world demanded proof that their love could survive beyond spectacle. It was a test neither had asked for, but both accepted. Eleanor faced it with quiet strength, refusing to hide from who she was or who she loved. Each challenge became another stone they crossed together, her courage fueling his resilience, his devotion strengthening her resolve. One evening, after a long day of questions and glances too sharp to ignore, they escaped to the riverside. Lanterns glowed along the path, and the water reflected streaks of silver light. Eleanor leaned into him, her voice soft. "Sometimes I feel as though the world is waiting for us to fall." He tilted her chin upward, his gaze steady, the storm of his past replaced with something luminous. "Let them wait. We'll keep walking." His lips brushed hers then, a kiss not of urgency, but of assurance, healing the fear that lingered in her chest. As the season turned, so too did their love deepen into something enduring. They were no longer strangers playing roles, but companions who had bled, healed, and chosen each other. Their laughter filled quiet mornings, their whispers stretched into long nights. Their presence became a rhythm neither wished to break. Yet Eleanor knew, with the clarity of someone who had seen storms, that the greatest test still lay ahead. Not from the world outside, but from the tender, fierce truth that love itself demanded. The courage to surrender wholly, with no illusions left. And so, beneath a sky streaked with the blush of sunset, as petals drifted from trees in soft cascades, she felt it stir within her. A new beginning waited, one she could not yet name, but sensed in every glance Peter gave her. The future unfolded before them, shimmering with both promise and uncertainty, and her heart whispered what her lips dared not yet speak. This is only the beginning. Summer came with a quiet brilliance, draping the city in gold, and the days at the Blackwood estate unfurled like petals opening under warmth. Eleanor woke to the sound of birds hidden in the rose gardens, the scent of coffee drifting from the kitchen where Peter, awkward in his rolled-up sleeves, attempted to master the art of brewing just for her. She often teased him, telling him that his empire might survive boardrooms and stock crashes, but not the precision of her morning ritual. He would shrug, kiss her forehead, and answer, "Then I'll keep trying until I get it right." Such moments, wrapped in simplicity, healed wounds deeper than either could measure. The world, however, refused to fade into silence. Invitations cascaded in, expectations pressed like invisible weights, and the press continued to hunger for a spectacle. Yet Peter no longer hid behind icy restraint. He carried Eleanor beside him, not as a shield, not as a mask, but as his truth. They walked red carpets, not as actors of illusion, but as lovers who had chosen to bare themselves to every gaze. When reporters asked how a ruthless CEO had found love, he answered with honesty. "She saw me when no one else dared to. That is all there is to say." And Elena, hearing those words, felt her heart lift into the light. But true healing is not woven only from the soft days. It grows in storms as well. There were nights when doubts returned, when her past as a journalist clashed with her present as his partner. Whispers accused her of bias, of sacrificing integrity for affection. In those hours, she sat at her desk, pen trembling in her hand, unsure if her words still held the same weight. Peter found her once, shoulders tense, eyes clouded, and he simply knelt beside her chair, taking her hands into his. "You are more than what they say. You are the voice that saved me, the courage that uncovered truth when it nearly drowned me. Don't let their shadows dim the fire you carry." His voice was steady, but his touch was tender, and in it she found her strength again. Together, they created a rhythm of resilience. She wrote pieces that no longer hid from the world, but offered it fragments of healing. Stories of injustice turned to redemption, of broken systems challenged by persistence, of love rising where despair once lived. He reshaped his empire with transparency, redirecting his power not toward fear, but toward building legacies that carried hope. Their journeys intertwined, each fueling the other, and soon their love became not just theirs, but a light that inspired those who watched from afar. When the day came for their wedding, the estate was transformed not into a hall of opulence, but into a sanctuary of sincerity. Roses bloomed in quiet rows, chairs filled with only those who had walked through storms with them, laughter mingling with the hush of wind. Eleanor's gown was simple, pure white, hugging her form without excess, her bouquet trembling only because her hands did. Emily whispered encouragement, her eyes bright with joy. And then the music began, carrying Eleanor forward through a path lined with light. Peter stood waiting, no longer the cold machine the world had once believed him to be, but a man whose every gaze carried warmth for only her. His vow was steady, each word a thread stitching together every wound, every joy, every promise they had lived. "I once thought perfection was armor," he said, his grey eyes glistening. "But when you came, I learned that love is not about flawless strength. It is about truth, even when it breaks us, even when it heals us. I will never let you fight alone again." Her reply trembled with tears, but held the same fire. "I once thought love was something I would always write about, never live. But you became my story, Peter, and I promised to walk with you through every light and every darkness." When their lips met, it was not the closing of a performance, but the unveiling of a life that would no longer be pretend. Applause rippled like waves, cheers rising. Yet in that moment there was only the two of them, bound in a love forged from fire and healed by gentleness. That evening, as twilight fell, they sat by the pond where lanterns glowed softly upon the water. Fireworks bloomed overhead, painting the sky in colors that mirrored the radiance in their eyes. Elena rested her head on Peter's shoulder, her voice warm. "Funny, isn't it? Everything began with a whisper, and now we are here." He brushed his lips against her hair, whispering back, "No more pretending. Only forever." And so their story, once tangled in secrecy and doubt, blossomed into something enduring. It was not perfect, but it was real, and in its imperfection lay a healing power greater than either had dreamed. They had walked through betrayal and fear, through loneliness and shadows, and emerged into the golden glow of a love that would not fade. If this story touched something tender in your heart, if it brought you warmth or reminded you of the healing that love can bring, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters here. Leave a like if this journey lit even a small spark of comfort within you, and subscribe so you can continue walking with me into more stories of love, resilience, and hope. Each gesture from you is not just support, it is a thread that helps weave the next chapter of light we create together.